In the silence between stars, there is time enough for empires to rise and fall without ever touching one another. Light travels for millennia before it reaches distant eyes, carrying the after-image of suns that have already died, of worlds that have already burned, of civilizations that once believed themselves eternal. The universe keeps no record of pride. Verith Seln had lived for 912 standard cycles, which was considered young among the Arcanet Council. She had witnessed the flowering of 3 stellar nurseries, the controlled collapse of a dying star into a navigable conduit, and the negotiation of treaties with species so alien that translation required mathematical poetry rather than language. She had believed, as all her people believed, that the Arcanaut represented the pinnacle of what intelligence could achieve when given time, resources, and the patience of millennia. That belief had died 3 rotations ago, somewhere in the burning wreckage of the Velen cluster, along with 40 billion of her people. Now she sat in the command center of a crippled vessel, watching the emergency lighting flicker against walls that had once gleamed with crystalline resonance patterns passed down through 12,000 years of accumulated art. The patterns were dark now. The crystals were cracked. Half the ship was open to vacuum, and the other half held what remained of her species' future, 7,000 survivors, most of them children and their caretakers, sealed in the deepest compartments where the hull was thickest. 7,000 out of a civilization that had numbered in the hundreds of billions. The weight of it pressed against her chest like a physical thing, making each breath feel like a small act of theft from the dead. "Elder Seln," a voice said from behind her, young, exhausted, barely holding together. "The navigation systems have isolated a signal." Verith turned slowly, her elongated limbs aching from the awkward gravity compensation that was all their damaged systems could maintain. Korath stood in the doorway, his scales dulled with stress, and his eyes carrying the hollow look of someone who had seen too much death too quickly to process any of it. "What kind of signal?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would bring no comfort. They were in uncharted space, far from any Arcanite territory, fleeing in the only direction their dying ship could carry them. "A beacon," Korath said. "Automated. It's broadcasting in a language we don't recognize." "Then it's not ours." "No, Dulver." Veroth closed her eyes. The Arcanate had cataloged over 2,000 sentient species across their domain. They had studied, uplifted, guided, and occasionally, when necessity demanded, contained those species. They had been the shepherds of this region of the galaxy for longer than most civilizations had existed. And now they were refugees, limping through the dark toward an unknown signal because they had nowhere else to go. "Show me," she said. The navigation display flickered to life, struggling against failing power systems. The signal was coming from a small planetary system approximately 4 light cycles away, close enough to reach with their remaining fuel, but barely. The system contained a single habitable world, a few gas giants, and what appeared to be extensive artificial structures in the outer reaches. "There's a civilization here," Korath said, pointing to the clusters of orbital constructs. "Primitive by our standards. The structures show signs of relatively recent development, perhaps a few centuries at most." Primitive. Verith tasted the word, and it was bitter. "We called the Hollow primitive once, when our scouts first discovered their migration patterns. We said they were mindless, incapable of strategy, unable to threaten a civilization as advanced as ours." Korath said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Send the distress call," Verith ordered. In mathematical form, in electromagnetic patterns, in every medium we can manage. Make it universal. Make it clear we are not a threat.
And if they don't respond?
Then we die out here instead of in their system. But at least we will have tried. She watched as Korath began the transmission sequence, and she thought about the nature of endings. The Arcanate had never considered that they might end. They had planned for millennia, built for eternity, crafted systems and protocols and contingencies for every conceivable threat. Except the inconceivable one. Except the hollow. The signal went out, bleeding into the void like a prayer to an empty universe. Verith did not expect an answer. The cosmos was vast and cold and supremely indifferent to suffering. But something answered. The response came within hours, impossibly fast for a primitive civilization, suggesting either advanced detection systems or remarkable attentiveness to their local space. The message was simple, transmitted in the same mathematical format the Arcanate had used. Coordinates, a designated approach vector, and a single repeated symbol that their translation systems interpreted, after some analysis, as an invitation. They want us to come to them, Korath said, and there was fear in his voice. Elder, we know nothing about these beings. They could be hostile. They could be dangerous. We are already dying, Verath reminded him gently. Our atmosphere processors will fail within 6 rotations. Our water recyclers are operating at 30% capacity. The children will begin suffering first, as they always do. She looked at the display, at the cluster of primitive structures orbiting that distant world, and she made the decision that every leader must eventually make, to choose the unknown over the certain death waiting behind them. Set course for the designated coordinates, and prepare a diplomatic packet. If we're going to die, I would rather die reaching for something than fleeing from nothing. The journey took 3 rotations, and they were the longest of Verith's long life. She spent them walking through the survivor compartments, speaking with the caretakers, watching the children play their quiet games in spaces that had never been designed for children. The Arcanate vessels were built for science, for diplomacy, for the slow and careful work of managing a vast stellar civilization. They were not built for this, for desperate flight, for crowded desperation, for the end of everything. Elder Soun, Saith said, and her voice was so small. Will the strangers help us? Verath knelt, a gesture of respect among her people, bringing her eyes level with the child's. I don't know, little one. I hope they will. What if they're afraid of us? The question cut deeper than the child could have known. Verith thought about the Arcanate's history, about the species they had contained or constrained, about the younger civilizations they had guided with what they believed was benevolent authority. She thought about how terrifying the Arcanate must have seemed to those species, vast, ancient, impossibly advanced. Now the Arcanate was broken, humbled, begging for shelter from strangers who had never known their greatness. Then we will show them they have no reason to fear, Verith said. We will be kind, we will be grateful, we will remember that we are guests in their home. Saith nodded, satisfied with this answer in the way children often are with simple truths that adults find unbearably complex. When they finally reached the designated coordinates, Verath stood in the damaged command center and watched the strangers' station grow on their failing displays. It was underwhelming. She had expected primitive, and primitive was what she found. The station was functional rather than beautiful, all hard angles and utilitarian design, without any of the flowing organic aesthetics that the Arcanate had cultivated over millennia. It looked like something built by engineers rather than artists, assembled for purpose rather than permanence.
Their construction materials are crude, Korath observed. Processed metals, polymer composites, nothing exotic. Their energy signatures suggest fusion power with supplementary solar collection, efficient but unremarkable.
And yet they're here, Vareth said quietly. In a system they've made their own, with structures that function, with the capacity to receive our signal and respond within hours. Do not make the mistake of confusing simplicity with weakness, Korath. The Hollow are simple. The Hollow consumed our empire.
He flinched, and she regretted the harshness of her words even as she knew they were necessary.
A new signal arrived, a docking request, transmitted in mathematical format but with surprising sophistication. The strangers had already begun adapting their communication protocols to match Arcanate patterns, extrapolating from the limited data they'd received.
That's impressive,
Korath admitted reluctantly. They're fast learners. Or they've done this before. She didn't know which possibility was more unsettling. They docked at the station's designated port, and the process was smoother than Vareth had expected. The strangers had configured their docking systems to accommodate the Arcanaut ship's profile, again adapted from minimal information in an impossibly short time. When the airlock cycled open, the Wrath was waiting with a small delegation, herself, Korath, and two of the senior caretakers who had insisted on accompanying their elder into unknown territory. The strangers were waiting for them. Vareth's first impression was that they were soft. Compared to the scaled, angular forms of the Arcanate, these beings seemed almost unfinished. Smooth skin in varying shades of brown and pink and tan, covered partially by fabric garments, their bodies displaying an almost unsettling symmetry. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head with forward-facing eyes. Predator eyes, she realized with a small chill. These beings had evolved from hunters. But there was nothing predatory in their posture. They stood at a respectful distance, their body language open and non-threatening. There were 4 of them, and one stepped forward. A female, Vera thought, based on secondary physical characteristics. "I'm Captain Maya Chen," the female said, and the words came through a small device that translated them into Arcanate mathematical speech. "Welcome to Threshold Station. We received your distress call, and we want to help." The words were simple. The delivery was calm. There was no grandstanding, no display of authority, no attempt to establish dominance. Just a straightforward statement of fact and intention. Varath felt something loosen in her chest, the first moment of genuine relief she'd experienced since the Velan cluster burned. "I am Elder Varoth Seln of the Arcanate," she said, and her voice cracked slightly despite her best efforts. We are grateful for your response." Captain Chen nodded, and there was something in her eyes, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even compassion, that suggested she recognized the weight behind Varoth's words. "You've come a long way," Chen said. "Your ship has significant damage. How many survivors do you have?" 7,243, Varath answered, most of them children. Something shifted in Chen's expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight tension in her jaw. "Children," she repeated softly. "Our youngest, our future. We saved what we could." There was a long silence. Chen turned to one of the other humans, a male with darker skin and close-cropped hair, and exchanged a few words in their own language. Then she turned back to Varoth. We have medical facilities, food synthesizers, and emergency housing capacity. It's not luxurious, but it's functional. We can accommodate your people while we assess your situation." "You would do this?" Verith couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "You know nothing about us. We could be anyone. We could be dangerous." Chen's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile, though it was difficult to read alien facial muscles. "Elder Selm, I've been in this system for 12 years. I've seen a lot of ships come through. Traders, refugees, explorers. I've learned to read people, even when they don't look anything like me." She paused, studying Veroth with those unsettling predator eyes. "You're exhausted," Chen continued. "You're grieving. You've lost something so massive that you can barely speak of it. And you came here anyway, with children in your hold, because you had no other choice." She shook her head slowly. "That's not the profile of a threat. That's the profile of someone who needs help." Verith felt the pressure behind her eyes that indicated imminent fluid release, the arcanate equivalent of tears. She had not wept since the Velen cluster. She had not allowed herself to. "Your perception is remarkable," she managed. "It's a human trait," Chen said simply. "We've had a lot of practice reading pain." Over the next several rotations, the survivors were transferred to Threshold Station in organized groups. The humans, for that was what they called themselves, these soft predators with their calm voices and practical solutions, had prepared quarters with remarkable efficiency. The spaces were plain but clean, the air calibrated to arcanate preferences based on atmosphere samples, the lighting adjusted to reduce strain on their photoreceptors. Everything was functional. Nothing was ostentatious, and somehow that very simplicity was more comforting than all the crystalline grandeur of the Arcanate's lost stations. Verith spent much of her time with Captain Chen, answering questions about her people's needs and carefully avoiding questions about what had driven them from their home. But Chen didn't push. She asked practical questions: dietary requirements, medical conditions, psychological support structures, and left the larger mysteries untouched. It was on the third rotation that Verith finally found herself unable to avoid the subject any longer. They were in Chen's office, a small, cluttered space filled with screens and physical documents, and a peculiar collection of small objects that Veroth assumed held personal significance. Chen had offered her a chair, and they sat across from each other, two beings from different worlds trying to find common ground. "Elder Selm," Chen said quietly, "we've had time to analyze your ship. The damage patterns are consistent with directed energy weapons of extremely high yield. Your hull shows evidence of repeated attacks over an extended period." "Whatever hit you," Chen continued, "it wasn't a natural phenomenon. And it wasn't a single engagement. You were hunted." Still, Verith remained silent, but something in her expression must have given her away. "You don't have to tell me," Chen said. "That's your business. But I need you to understand something." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped slightly. "We're going to help you regardless of what you share. That's not conditional. But if there's something out there that might follow you, something that might threaten this system, I need to know." The question was reasonable. More than reasonable, it was responsible, and yet Verith found herself unable to answer immediately, because answering meant acknowledging the full scope of the catastrophe, meant speaking aloud the words that would make the nightmare real. "We called ourselves the Arcanate," she finally said, and her voice felt like it belonged to someone else. "We have existed for 12,000 of your years. We guided this region of the galaxy. We believed we were eternal." Chen said nothing. She simply listened, her expression attentive, but not pressing.
3 rotations ago, less than one of your months, we controlled territories spanning hundreds of star systems. Our population numbered in the hundreds of billions. Our fleets were considered invincible by every species we had encountered.
She paused, struggling with what came next. And then the Hollow came.
The Hollow?
We don't know what they truly are. We never managed to communicate with them, never captured one alive, never found any evidence of culture or negotiation or anything we would recognize as intelligence. They simply consume. Worlds, stations, ships, populations, everything organic, everything that lives. They move through space like a migration, and nothing stops them.
Nothing? Chen's voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes, an intensity that Verith hadn't seen before.
Nothing we could devise. Our weapons damaged them, but they adapted. Our shields held for a time, but they evolved. Every strategy we developed, every technology we deployed, they countered within rotations. They learn from every attack, grow stronger from every defeat. And there are so many of them, Captain Chen. So many that our fleets became nothing more than temporary obstacles.
Verith's hands trembled slightly. In the Velan cluster, we made our final stand. 600 warships, 40 billion civilians on the worlds behind them. We believed that concentrated firepower, careful strategy, and desperate courage would be enough.
What happened?
They came in numbers we could not count. They overwhelmed our defenses in hours rather than days. They did not stop to consume our fallen vessels. They simply pushed through, straight toward the populated worlds. The last message I received from the cluster was from my sister. She had time to say goodbye. That was all.
The office was very quiet. Outside, through the reinforced viewport, stars turned slowly in the eternal dark.
40 billion people, Chen said softly.
In a single cluster. We have lost many more since. The Hollow are still moving, still consuming. What you see before you, we 7,000 survivors, may be all that remains of a civilization that once considered itself the greatest in the galaxy.
Chen was silent for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to her viewport, and stared out at the stars with her back to Varath.
Elder Seln, she said without turning around, how long do you estimate before the Hollow reach this system?
Verith felt her respiratory system constrict.
You believe they will follow us?
I'm asking what you believe.
The honesty of the question demanded an honest answer. Based on their previous movement patterns and the trajectory of our escape, I estimate they could reach this region within 3 to 4 of your months. Perhaps sooner, if they have improved their transit capabilities, which they often do.
Chen nodded slowly. She continued staring out the viewport for another long moment. When she finally turned back, her expression was strange, not frightened, not distressed, but something else, something Varath could not identify. "Thank you for telling me," Chen said. "I know that wasn't easy."
You should evacuate, Darath heard herself saying. Your civilization is young. You have time to flee, to find somewhere distant, to... No. The word was quiet, but absolute. Captain Chen, you don't understand. The Hollow destroyed a civilization that has existed for 12,000 years. Your people have been spacefaring for, what, a few centuries? You cannot fight them. You cannot stop them. The only rational choice is to run. Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Varath's scales prickle with unease. Elder Selm, I appreciate your concern, I do, but I think there are some things about humanity you don't understand yet.
She moved to one of the screens on her wall and entered a series of commands. With your permission, I'd like to share some information with my superiors. Not about your people, about the threat. They'll need time to prepare.
Prepare for what? There is nothing you can do. Maybe, Chen said. Maybe not. But we're going to try.
Why? Verith demanded, and the question carried all the weight of her exhaustion, her grief, her bewildered frustration with this strange, soft species that refused to acknowledge the obvious. Why would you risk everything for strangers, for a threat you've never faced? We have nothing to offer you. We are broken. We are finished.
Chen turned to face her fully, and in that moment, Verith saw something she had never expected to see in alien eyes. Recognition. Understanding. A mirror reflecting her own pain back at her. Because we know what it's like, Chen said simply. We know what it is to be broken. We know what it is to face extinction. And we know what it means when someone reaches out for help. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was very quiet. Humanity almost died, Elder Seln, several times. We almost killed ourselves, almost destroyed our own world, almost faded into nothing before we ever reached the stars. Everything you see around you, these stations, these ships, these peaceful little corner of space, we built all of it from the ashes of catastrophes that nearly ended us. And yet you survived. We survived, Chen confirmed, not because we were the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. We survived because we refused to stop. Because every time we got knocked down, every time it looked hopeless, every time the rational choice was to give up, we didn't.
She smiled again, and this time there was something in it that might have been pride, or might have been sorrow. It was hard to tell with humans.
So, when you ask why we would help you, why we would face a threat that destroyed an empire far greater than ours, the answer is simple. It's what we do. It's who we are. The next rotation, things began to change. Varath noticed it gradually at first. Small shifts in the station's rhythm, subtle increases in activity, more ships docking at the outer berths, more humans moving through corridors with purpose in their stride, communications traffic spiking at odd hours. She asked Captain Chen about it, but Chen only smiled that strange smile and said that preparations were underway.
What kind of preparations? Verith pressed.
The necessary kind. It was not an answer, but Verith found herself accepting it. There was something in Chen's calm certainty that made questioning feel unnecessary. The humans were doing something. Whether that something would matter remained to be seen. On the fifth rotation, Korath came to Verath with a data tablet clutched in his trembling hands.
Elder, you need to see this.
The tablet displayed long-range sensor readings, primitive by Arcanite standards, but adequate for basic detection. Verith studied them, and for a moment she didn't understand what she was looking at.
Then she did. The Hollow were coming. They were still distant, weeks away at their current pace, but they were coming. The sensor reading showed a mass of signatures so dense that the display struggled to differentiate individual units.
It's larger than the force that hit the Velen cluster, Korath said, and his voice was barely a whisper. Much larger. They must have merged with other migration streams, combined their strength.
Verith felt the cold certainty of doom settled into her bones. They've been growing, she realized. Every world they've consumed, every civilization they've destroyed, they've grown stronger, larger, more numerous.
What do we do? She had no answer. There was no answer. They had fled across the galaxy to escape the Hollow, and the Hollow had followed. It was over. "We should tell the humans," she said finally. "They deserve to know. They should have time to evacuate, to—"
Elder Korath's voice was strange. "The humans already know. They detected the Hollow before we did."
"That's impossible. Their sensors are—"
"Their sensors may be primitive, but they have other advantages." He pointed to the tablet. "This data came from the humans. They shared it with us."
Verith stared at the readings, uncomprehending. If they know the Hollow are coming, why haven't they begun evacuation protocols? Why aren't their ships fleeing? "I don't know, Elder, but look at this." He manipulated the display, and new data appeared, tracking information for vessels in the local system. Verath watched the numbers climb, and her respiratory system forgot to function. Ships were arriving. Not leaving, arriving. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Some were small and fast, others were larger, heavier. They came from multiple vectors, streaming into the system from different points of origin. "Where are they coming from?" she asked. "The humans have colonies," Korath said. "Many of them. They've been sending out vessels for nearly a standard cycle now. I don't understand the scale, Elder. According to our estimates of their technological level, they shouldn't be able to coordinate something like this." Verath watched the display as more and more signatures appeared, converging on the system like a school of fish responding to some invisible signal. "They shouldn't be doing this," she said. "They should be running. Any rational species would run."
But the humans weren't running. They were gathering.
The next rotation, Verath sought out Captain Chen and found her in a tactical center that hadn't existed a week ago. The room was filled with holographic displays, communication consoles, and humans who moved between stations with quiet efficiency. "Elder Seln," Chen said when she entered. "I was going to come find you. I think it's time you saw something." She led Verath to a central display that showed the system in three-dimensional projection. The image was cluttered with icons, far more than Verath had expected.
"Your fleet," Verith said slowly. "You've assembled a fleet."
"We've assembled what we could on short notice," Chen replied. "More is coming. It takes time to cross interstellar distances, even with our transit systems, but we've been making arrangements."
"How many ships?"
Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she touched a control, and the display zoomed out. Verith's scales went cold. The system wasn't the only point of congregation. The display showed dozens of gathering points across local space, each one swarming with signatures. Lines connected them, transit routes, she realized, all feeding into a complex pattern of staging areas and supply chains. 3,622 combat-capable vessels are currently in system or en route, Chen said calmly. Another 8,000 are mobilizing from outer colonies. Industrial facilities across 12 worlds are operating at maximum output, producing ordnance, replacement parts, and additional platforms. Verith's mind struggled to process the numbers. "You've been a spacefaring species for 3 centuries."
"Approximately."
"You should not have this capacity. You should not have the infrastructure, the population, the industrial base." "Elder Seln." Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. You looked at our stations, at our technology, and you saw a young, primitive species still finding its way among the stars. You weren't wrong, exactly. We are young. But primitive?" She shook her head slowly. "We just do things differently." "Differently how?" Chen turned to face her fully. "Your civilization focused on perfection. on elegant solutions, on sustainable systems, on building things that would last forever. It's beautiful, Elder, it really is. The crystalline art in your vessels, the mathematical poetry in your language, we've never seen anything like it.
She paused. But we never had the luxury of forever. We built fast, we built rough, we built to survive. And when something threatened to destroy us, we built more, faster, meaner. Because that's what our history taught us. That's what kept us alive on a planet that tried to kill us 100 different ways.
Varoth looked at the display, at the swarm of vessels converging from every direction, at the industrial output numbers that scrolled across one corner of the screen.
You're preparing for war, she said.
We're preparing for survival, Chen corrected. The war already started when the Hollow attacked your people. We're just acknowledging reality.
You cannot win. The words came out automatically, carrying all the weight of the Arcanate's final defeat. We were more advanced than you. We had millennia of experience, and we still fell.
Chen nodded. You did, and I'm sorry for that, truly. But, Elder Selm, respectfully, you've never seen humanity fight for survival. There was something in her eyes, something hard, something old, that didn't belong on the face of a species so young. We're good at it, she said simply. It's our specialty. The waiting was the hardest part. The Hollow took their time, approaching the system in a vast arc that seemed almost leisurely. Verith watched their progress on the tactical displays and tried to calculate the moment when everything would end. But something strange happened as she watched.
The humans didn't panic. They didn't argue or fracture or fall into the kind of internal conflicts that had plagued the Arcanate's final days. They simply worked.
Ships were organized into formations, weapons were calibrated and tested, logistics chains were established with a precision that made Varath's head ache. And everywhere she looked, there was that same quiet certainty, that unshakable calm that she had first noticed in Captain Chen. She found herself wandering the station, observing, trying to understand. She watched human technicians rewiring damaged systems with casual competence. She watched human officers conducting briefings with voices that never rose, never wavered. She watched human soldiers checking equipment with the relaxed focus of people who had done this 1,000 times before. None of them seemed afraid. Or rather, Varoth realized, they were all afraid. She could see it in the small signs, the occasional tremor of hands, the tight set of jaws. But they were doing their jobs anyway. On the 7th rotation, she found herself in one of the station's observation lounges, watching the gathered fleet through reinforced viewports. Ships of all sizes hung in the void, their running lights blinking in synchronized patterns. A human male approached her, young, with red hair and freckled skin. He was wearing a maintenance uniform, and his hands were stained with machine lubricant.
Mind if I sit, Elder? He asked.
Varoth gestured to the seat beside her. Please. He settled in with a sigh, his eyes fixed on the fleet outside. It's something, isn't it? Never thought I'd see this many ships in one place.
Are you afraid? Varath asked.
He considered the question seriously. Yeah, he said eventually. Pretty terrified, actually. But, he shrugged, it doesn't really matter, does it? The job still needs doing. You could flee. Your family. My family is on Earth, he said. My mom, my sister, her kids. If we don't stop this thing here, it'll reach them eventually. So, he spread his hands. Here I am. Varoth studied his face. So strange, so soft, so utterly alien, and saw nothing but simple, unshakable resolve. Your species is remarkable, she said quietly. He laughed. a short sound without much humor in it. Yeah, we're something, all right. Stubborn as hell, mostly. My grandpa used to say the only thing humans are really good at is refusing to die when we should. He glanced at her. No offense, Elder, but your people, the Arcanate, you were amazing. The things you built, the things you knew, were not in your league. And yet you're here, preparing to fight an enemy that destroyed us. Yeah, well, he turned back to the viewport. Like I said, stubborn. The hollow arrived on the 16th rotation. Verith watched them come through the long-range displays, and even after everything she had witnessed, the sight still stole her breath. The swarm was vast, a spreading stain of signatures that seemed to fill the entire incoming vector. The human tactical center was calm. Officers spoke in measured tones, relaying information, issuing orders. Captain Chen stood at the central display, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. "All vessels report ready," an officer announced. "Fleet is at station keeping. Weapon systems hot. Defensive grids operational." Chen nodded once. "Any change in hollow behavior?" "Negative. They're continuing direct approach. No deviation from projected course." "They're confident," Verath heard herself say. "They've never encountered anything that could stop them. They have no reason to expect resistance." Chen glanced at her. "Good. Let them be confident." The hollow swarm continued its approach, and Verith waited for the moment when the humans would realize the hopelessness of their position. She waited for the panic, the breakdown, the desperate scramble to escape. It never came. Instead, Chen simply said, "All vessels, execute pattern Alpha. Defensive posture. Weapons free." And the human fleet moved. Verath had seen fleets maneuver before. She had witnessed the elegant formations of the Arcanate's finest admirals, the mathematical precision of vessels dancing through battle space. She had thought she understood what coordinated naval action looked like. She had been wrong. The human fleet didn't move like a collection of independent ships following orders. It moved like a single organism, 3,000 vessels shifting and adjusting in perfect synchronization, each one occupying exactly the right position at exactly the right moment. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no wasted motion. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "How?" she breathed. "We practice a lot," Chen said, and there might have been amusement in her voice. The first hollow elements entered weapons range, and the human fleet opened fire. Verith had expected a barrage, the overwhelming concentration of firepower that Arcanate doctrine dictated against swarm enemies. What she witnessed was something else entirely. The human weapons struck with surgical precision, each shot finding specific targets, specific vulnerabilities. They didn't try to overwhelm the hollow with sheer force. They dissected them, cutting through the swarm with calculated efficiency. And when the hollow adapted, when their organic forms shifted to counter the assault, the humans adapted faster. New weapon frequencies, new attack patterns, new tactics that seemed to materialize from nowhere, as if the fleet commanders had anticipated every possible countermeasure. "How are you doing this?" Verith demanded. "The hollow adapt to everything. They evolved past every strategy we developed." Chen's eyes never left the display. The hollow adapt to what they encounter. They learn from failure. It's actually a pretty simple algorithm once you understand it. She paused. The problem is, they're not the only ones who can learn. The battle raged for hours, or what felt like hours. Verath's sense of time had become unreliable. The hollow threw themselves at the human defenses in wave after wave, and wave after wave was broken. But not without cost. Human ships died. Verith watched their icons wink out of existence. watched the casualty numbers climb, watched the fleet shrink under the relentless assault. The Hollow were taking losses too, terrible losses, far beyond anything the Arcanet had inflicted. But there were so many of them.
"You're going to run out of ships before they run out of numbers," Veyari said, and her voice was raw.
"Probably," Chen agreed.
Then why? Chen turned to look at her, and for the first time the Roth saw something beneath that unshakable calm. Not fear exactly, but a kind of fierce intensity that seemed to burn from within.
"Because every second we hold them here, Elder, is a second someone else has to prepare. Every ship they lose against us is a ship they can't throw at the next system. This isn't about winning." Her voice dropped. "This is about making them pay for every inch."
And they did.
The battle became a nightmare of attrition, ship after ship disappearing from both sides, the void filling with wreckage and debris. But the humans never broke. They never routed. They fought with a cold, implacable fury that seemed to come from somewhere beyond mere courage.
Veyari found herself praying, something she hadn't done since childhood, to the old gods of her people, the ones the Arcanate had abandoned when they became too advanced for such superstitions.
She prayed for a miracle. She didn't expect one. It came anyway.
22 hours into the battle, when the human fleet had been reduced to less than a third of its original strength, and the Hollow Swarm was beginning to press through the defensive perimeter, the sensors registered new contacts.
Hundreds of them. Thousands of them.
They came from every vector at once, from behind the Hollow Swarm, from the system's outer reaches, from transit points that Veyari hadn't known existed. They poured into the battle like a wave breaking against a shore, and they were angry.
"Second wave," Chen said, and for the first time there was something like satisfaction in her voice. Outer colonies responded.
"You planned this?" Veyari was beyond shock. She was beyond confusion. She was simply watching something she couldn't understand.
"We adapted to the situation," Chen shrugged. "The first wave was supposed to hold long enough for reinforcements to arrive. It was going to be close, but we figured we could make it work."
"Figured you could make it work," Veyari repeated. "You wagered everything, your fleet, your people, your civilization, on figuring you could make it work." "Elder Selnin." Chen's voice was quiet, but it carried across the tactical center like a bell. "What would you have had us do? Run? Leave this system and hope the Hollow didn't follow? Find somewhere else to make a stand, somewhere farther from our homes, with less time to prepare?" She shook her head. "We chose here. We chose now, and we're going to see it through." The second wave hit the Hollow like a hammer. Fresh ships, fresh weapons, fresh crews, all of them slammed into the enemy with the same cold precision that had characterized the initial defense.
But something was different now. The Hollow were damaged, depleted, their adaptive capabilities strained by hours of combat, and the humans seemed to sense it.
The battle shifted from defense to offense. Human formations pushed forward, driving into the Hollow Swarm with relentless aggression. They didn't just hold the line anymore. They broke it, punched through it, shattered the enemy's cohesion, and exploited every gap.
Veyari watched a species barely 3 centuries old tear apart a nightmare that had consumed her 12,000-year civilization, and she wept. She wept for the Arcanate, for the 40 billion dead in the Valen cluster, for her sister's last goodbye, and all the empty spaces where her people used to be. And she wept for humanity, this strange,
stubborn, impossible species that had answered a stranger's distress call and thrown themselves into an apocalyptic war for no reason except that it was the right thing to do.
The battle ended not with a final cataclysmic explosion, but with a gradual fading. The hollow swarm, reduced to a fraction of its original size, began to disperse. Individual elements broke away, fleeing in different directions, no longer functioning as a coherent force.
The humans let them go.
"You're not pursuing?" Verith asked, exhausted beyond words.
We don't have the resources for a full extermination campaign, Chen said. And honestly, some of those fragments might lead us to useful intelligence about their origins. She paused. Besides, they'll remember this. They'll remember what it cost them. Maybe it'll make them think twice before they come back.
"You believe they will come back?" Chen's expression was steady. "They might, and if they do, we'll be ready." She glanced at the displays, at the scattered human fleet regrouping among the debris. "That's how it works, Elder. That's how it always works. The fight isn't over. It's never over. But as long as there's something worth protecting, we'll be here."
Verith looked at her, truly looked, for perhaps the first time since they'd met. She saw the exhaustion beneath the composure, the grief beneath the calm. She saw a woman who had just lost thousands of her people defending strangers, who was already thinking about the next threat, the next battle, the next sacrifice. And she saw herself.
"Captain Chen," she said slowly, "I must apologize."
Chen raised an eyebrow. For what?
When we first arrived, I thought you were primitive, unsophisticated. I looked at your stations and your ships and your technology, and I thought you were like children playing at civilization." She took a breath. "I was wrong. I was arrogant and blind, and I was wrong."
Chen smiled, a tired, genuine smile. "You weren't entirely wrong, Elder. We are primitive, by a lot of standards. Our technology's crude, our history is short. We've made mistakes that would make your people cringe."
She stepped closer to Verith, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. "But that's not what matters, is it? What matters is what you do when everything falls apart. What matters is whether you stand or run. And I think," she reached out and hesitantly touched Verith's arm, "I think that's something we share."
Verith stared at the human's hand, so soft, so fragile-looking, and felt the warmth of it through her scales.
"Your people answered our distress call," she said. "You asked nothing in return. You demanded no payment, no alliance, no tribute. You simply helped." "Yes."
Why?
Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When I was young, there was a disaster in a part of my world, a place called Southeast Asia. Floods, millions displaced, entire cities underwater. And from all over our planet, help came. Money, supplies, people willing to risk their lives, from countries that had been enemies a generation ago, from strangers who would never meet the people they were saving."
She shook her head slowly.
"I asked my mother why. Why would people help strangers? Why would they sacrifice for people they'd never see?"
And what did she say?
Chen met Verith's eyes, and there was something ancient in her gaze, something that transcended the youth of her species.
She said, "Because someone always has to go first. Someone has to extend a hand, offer help, take a risk. And if you wait for someone else to do it, maybe no one ever will." Then she said something I've never forgotten.
"What was it?" "When you hear a cry for help, you answer. Not because it's smart, not because it's safe, but because that's what makes us human." The words hung in the air between them, simple and vast. Veyari looked out the viewport at the aftermath of battle, the debris, the wreckage, the scattered survivors of both fleets. She looked at the impossible thing that had just happened, a young species defeating an enemy that had crushed an ancient empire.
And she understood, finally, what she had been witnessing since her ship first docked at this small, rough-edged station.
It wasn't technology that made humanity different. It wasn't raw power or ancient wisdom or elegant solutions. It was something simpler and more profound.
It was the refusal to accept that some battles couldn't be won.
It was the willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers.
It was the stubborn, impossible, beautiful insistence on standing up when logic said to lie down. You called your response answering without words, Veyari said slowly, remembering the phrase from human communications she'd observed. What does that mean?
Chen smiled. It means some things don't need to be said. Some promises don't need to be spoken. When someone is drowning, you don't stand on the shore and discuss whether you should save them. You jump in. She turned to face the viewport, and her voice grew distant. Your distress call reached Earth. It crossed light years of space, carrying everything, your exhaustion, your grief, your desperate hope. And something in it resonated with us. Something that spoke to the parts of ourselves we try hardest to protect. She paused. We didn't need to debate it. We didn't need to negotiate or calculate or weigh the costs. We just answered. Because that's who we are. Because that's who we choose to be. Veyari stood beside her, two beings from worlds impossibly far apart, and felt something she hadn't felt since before the Hollow came. Hope. Your civilization will rebuild, Chen said quietly. Your people, the 7,000 you saved, they're young, they'll grow, they'll carry everything the Arcanet was, and they'll add to it. And when they're ready, they won't be alone. You would help us rebuild? After everything? We would help you become whatever you want to become. Chen turned to face her. Not because you're useful, not because we want something from you, but because that's how it works. That's how civilizations should work. You help the ones who need it, and someday, maybe, they help someone else. A chain, Veyari said softly, extending forward through time. Something like that. They stood together in silence for a long moment, watching the stars wheel slowly past. Finally, Veyari spoke again. Captain Chen, I have lived for more than 900 cycles. I have seen wonders that would break your mind to comprehend. I have witnessed the birth of stars and the death of worlds. I believed I understood the universe. She turned to face the human, and her voice trembled with something between sorrow and joy. I was wrong. In 900 cycles, I never saw anything as extraordinary as what your species did today. You heard strangers calling from the dark, and you came running, not for power, not for glory, not for gain. You came because you could, because someone needed help, because that is what you are. Chen's expression softened. Elder, no, please, let me say this. Veyari drew herself up, standing as tall as her exhausted body would allow. The Arcanate believed we were the guardians of this galaxy. We believed we were chosen to guide the younger species, to shepherd them toward wisdom. We were proud, and our pride blinded us. She took a breath. You are 3 centuries old. You are primitive by every measure we used. And yet you have shown me something the Arcanet never understood in 12,000 years of existence. What's that?
Veyari reached out and took Chen's hands in her own, an intimacy her people rarely shared, and felt the warmth of the human's fragile, tenacious life against her scales.
That strength is not about power. It is not about technology or knowledge or the accumulation of ages. It is about what you choose to do when someone is suffering and you have the ability to help. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It is about answering, without hesitation, without conditions, without words. Chen's eyes glistened, and Veyari realized with wonder that humans could weep.
Elder Seln, Chen said softly, I'm just a station captain. I'm not special. I'm not wise. I just try to do the right thing when I can.
Yes, Veyari said, and that is exactly what makes your species extraordinary. She released Chen's hands and stepped back, composing herself. The children of my people will grow up knowing what you did for them. They will carry stories of the soft strangers who answered a call for help, who bled and died fighting nightmares that weren't their own. And when they are old enough to rebuild, they will remember.
What will they remember?
Veyari smiled, an arcanate expression that she realized suddenly looked almost like a human one. They will remember that in the darkest moment of our existence, when all seemed lost, when the universe itself seemed to have abandoned us, we were not alone. She looked out the viewport one last time, at the stars that had witnessed her people's greatest defeat and their most unexpected salvation.
They will remember humanity.
And in the silence between stars, where empires rose and fell, where civilizations flickered like candles in the void, one species had done something remarkable. They had heard a cry in the darkness, and they had answered.
Not with treaties or conditions.
Not with demands or leverage.
Not with words at all. Just with action, just with presence, just with the fundamental, stubborn, glorious refusal to turn away from someone who needed help.
That was humanity's answer.
And it echoed across the galaxy forever. Train yourself as an elite HFY Sci-Fi storyteller.
An alien distress call reached Earth. Humanity answered without words. HFY Sci-Fi.
The title must shape the entire narrative, tone, and payoff of the story, with the meaning of the title becoming fully clear only by the end.
The story must begin quietly and cinematically, with a reflective, almost poetic opening about the stars, time, or history, creating a sense of cosmic scale before any conflict is revealed. Avoid action at the start. Build curiosity, mystery, and emotional tension immediately so the audience feels compelled to keep listening. The narrative must follow a clear point of view, primarily from a non-human alien character belonging to an ancient, highly advanced civilization that has existed for thousands of years and once dismissed humanity as primitive, insignificant, or dangerous. This character must be named and emotionally developed, showing exhaustion, fear, regret, suppressed pride, and growing awe. The alien civilization must be facing a catastrophic collapse or extinction-level war, with losses revealed gradually through dialogue, memory, and observation. Fleets, worlds, and billions of lives must be lost, but never dumped all at once. Let the scale unfold naturally and emotionally. Humans must initially appear calm, restrained, and unimpressive on the surface. Their stations, ships, and behavior should feel functional rather than grand. Human characters should be polite, observant, emotionally intelligent, and controlled. They must never boast or explain their power directly. Their strength should feel unsettling because it is quiet. The HFY reveal must be a slow burn. Humanity's true nature should emerge through adaptability, strategic thinking, unity, endurance, and an almost frightening calm in the face of annihilation. Their history of hardship and survival must quietly explain why they are different. As the story progresses, show humans preparing, mobilizing, or responding on a scale that shocks the ancient alien civilization, not through spectacle, but through coordination, inevitability, and confidence. The alien POV character should gradually realize that humanity was never weak, only restrained. The final third of the story must deliver a powerful HFY payoff that feels earned. Humanity's response should be overwhelming, precise, and unstoppable, fulfilling the promise of the title. The alien POV character must experience awe, fear, humility, and understanding as the balance of power irrevocably shifts. And with a strong, emotional conclusion, not just victory. The final lines should leave the audience with chills, reinforcing themes of humility, endurance, empathy, and the terrifying strength of a species forged by struggle.
Do not include bullet points, section headers, explanations, summaries, or author commentary. Do not rush pacing.